Two serpents coil around a central staff. This image appears in temples across Egypt, in yogic diagrams across India, in Greek medicine, in Mesoamerican carvings. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia carved the same symbol because they discovered the same anatomy. An anatomy that Western textbooks barely acknowledge and popular spirituality has reduced to decoration. What coils at the base of your spine is consciousness itself in dormant form. The creative power that manifested your body, your mind, your entire experience of reality, contracted into a sleeping point. The two serpents winding upward represent polar forces that govern everything from your breath to your perception to the difference between feeling alive and feeling dead inside. And the central column they embrace is what opens when polarity resolves into unity. Tonight, I'm laying out what these forces are, how they operate every moment you're alive, why one dominates at different times and what that dominance produces, and how the sleeping force at the base of your spine awakens through conditions that allow what was always alive to recognize itself as alive. This goes beyond the basic channel descriptions you find in yoga manuals. We've touched the serpent power before in prior videos. This time we're entering the nuances that esoteric traditions kept for advanced practitioners. The qualitative differences between the two currents, what happens at the junction points where they cross, why certain practices work with one channel versus the other, and the recognition that sits at the center of this entire teaching. By the end of this, you'll understand why these traditions personified energy as a goddess. You'll know how to identify which channel dominates in any given moment and what that means for the state you're experiencing. You'll have a method to verify the channels exist through direct sensation, and you'll see why awakening is more accurately described as recognition than achievement. I'll be drawing from the Isha lineage and the tantric-kriya traditions that inform that transmission, from Kashmir Shaivism's understanding of consciousness concealing and revealing itself, from the Tamil Siddhar maps of subtle anatomy that predate written history, and from the Kemetic understanding of the serpent force that their initiates worked with for thousands of years before these teachings reached the Himalayas. To preserve clarity and make this wisdom accessible, I'll use English translations throughout, moon channel rather than specialized terms, central column rather than technical vocabulary. The precision remains, the barrier dissolves. Names of specific teachers and lineages stay intact because those point to real transmission holders. Everything else gets translated so the meaning reaches you directly. You know how we get down. Get ready. The power at the base of your spine descended there. Kashmir Shaivism calls this the descent of consciousness from its unlimited state into increasingly contracted forms. The supreme knowing that recognizes itself as infinite progressively limits itself, first into subtle space, then into perceiving subjects and perceived objects, then into the elements, then into bodies. At each stage of descent, consciousness veils more of its nature. By the time it reaches the base of the spine, it has forgotten almost everything about what it is. It rests there, coiled 3.5 times around a subtle nucleus, holding the complete memory of its infinite nature in compressed form. The sleeping occurs because consciousness has so thoroughly veiled itself that it takes its limiting conditions to be absolute reality. This teaching reframes everything about what you're attempting when you work with these energies. The complete creative capacity of existence itself already lives at the base of your spine. You are uncovering power always present, accessing what was placed there when consciousness descended into form. Awakening means removing the obstructions that keep consciousness from recognizing what it embedded in the very architecture of the body it created. The Tamil Siddhars understood this descent as intentional. Consciousness contracts into form because form allows certain experiences that formlessness cannot provide. The limitations of a body, weight, hunger, mortality, create the conditions for specific kinds of knowing. A being without boundaries cannot know what it is to push against a boundary. A being without death cannot know the preciousness that mortality discloses. So consciousness descended, veiled itself, forgot what it was, and embedded the complete instructions for return in the very architecture of the body it created. The two serpents are expressions of this power itself. They are its agents. The currents that flow through the left and right channels represent the same creative force in polarized expression. One current carries the cooling quality, the receptive aspect, the dimension of consciousness that allows experience to enter. The other current carries the heating quality, the active aspect, the dimension that projects outward into manifestation. Together they create the tension from which all experience arises. This polarity makes experience possible. Experience requires a subject here and an object there, an inside receiving and an outside presenting. The two channels running alongside your spine are the mechanism that generates the duality necessary for any experience to occur. They function as the engine of perception itself. The left channel, what yogic traditions call the moon channel, carries qualities you can feel directly if you pay attention. Coolness, receptivity, the contemplative mood, the capacity to absorb, to take in, to become still and allow impressions to enter. When this channel dominates, you feel introspective. Your thinking slows. Creativity of the subtle kind becomes available, the kind that receives insight rather than manufactures output. The Isha lineage teaches that this lunar current governs the left side of the body and ends in the left nostril. Right now, as you're listening, bring presence to your nostrils. Notice which one carries more airflow. If the left nostril is more open, the moon channel is dominant. If the right nostril carries more air, the sun channel dominates. This alternates naturally throughout the day in roughly 90-minute cycles. But stress, illness, mental states, and energetic imbalances can lock someone into prolonged dominance of one channel, producing chronic patterns that distort their entire experience of life. The right channel, the sun channel, carries heat, projection, the capacity to act, to move outward, to manifest intention into form. When this channel dominates, you feel alert, capable of physical work, drawn toward activity rather than reflection. Digestion strengthens, the body generates more heat, the mind becomes more analytical, more focused on problem solving than on receiving inspiration. Both channels serve complementary purposes. They are expressions of the same force in polarized form, and complete functioning requires both in proper balance and proper timing. The moon channel carries wisdom inward, the sun channel carries wisdom outward. Together they create the full spectrum of human capacity. The problem arises when one channel chronically dominates at the expense of the other. Someone locked in lunar dominance tends toward lethargy, excessive internalization, difficulty translating insight into action. They may have profound realizations but cannot ground them in daily life. Someone locked in solar dominance tends toward exhaustion, excessive doing, inability to receive or rest. They may accomplish much externally but feel empty internally. Both patterns represent the same underlying dysfunction. The channels have fallen out of their natural rhythm and locked into fixed positions. If this is clarifying something you felt but couldn't name, or if you're recognizing a pattern in your own experience, drop a comment about which dominance you suspect you carry. The lunar tendency toward inwardness or the solar tendency toward constant doing. This is where the teaching becomes more subtle than textbook diagrams convey. The channels interweave, they cross at specific junction points, and at each crossing something significant happens. The Vajrayana traditions, particularly the teachings transmitted through Naropa and Talopa in the Kaju lineage, describe these crossing points as knots. When the two currents cross, they create a kind of energetic binding. These knots correspond roughly to the major energy centers, but they have a distinct function. The centers are junctions where multiple channels converge. The knots are specifically where the left and right currents wrap around the central channel and constrict it. Imagine a garden hose with points along its length where something has wrapped around it and squeezed. Water can still flow, but it's restricted. At each constriction point, pressure builds. This is analogous to what happens at the knots. The central channel exists and subtle energy flows through it, but the volume is reduced at each knot. The vast majority of humans live their entire lives with the central channel essentially closed because the knots have never loosened. The dormant power at the base of the spine cannot rise through the central channel while these knots remain tight. This is why forcing the serpent power to awaken is dangerous. If intense energy moves upward before the knots have loosened, it creates pressure at the constriction points. This pressure produces symptoms that range from uncomfortable to destabilizing heat, pressure in the head, emotional volatility, and in severe cases, genuine psychological crisis. The energy has nowhere to go. It builds and builds at a knot it cannot pass through. The traditional approach to this was years of preparation before any direct awakening work. Practices that gradually loosen the knots, breath work that harmonizes the two side channels, so they stop pulling against the center. Physical postures that create space in the areas where knots form. Ethical refinement that dissolves the psychological conflicts that manifest as energetic constriction. Only after substantial preparation would a teacher introduce practices aimed at awakening the dormant force. This preparation period represents practical understanding of subtle anatomy. You cannot pour high-voltage current through a wire designed for low voltage without burning out the system. The same applies to the subtle body. Awakening the power means awakening the complete creative force of existence itself. The vessel must be prepared to carry that power, or the vessel breaks. Are you with me? The Kemetic traditions use different imagery but describe the same architecture. The backbone of Osiris represents the central column through which life force rises. The serpent imagery appears throughout Egyptian iconography as precise description of internal anatomy. The urious cobra at the pharaoh's forehead marks the place where the serpent force reaches after ascending through the pillar. The pharaoh wearing this symbol indicated one in whom the ascent had occurred, whose crown center had been opened by the risen power. The Egyptian mysteries worked with this force for thousands of years before the technology migrated to other regions. Some scholars trace the tantric teachings of India to Egyptian initiates who traveled east. Others propose independent discovery of the same anatomy by different cultures. Either way, the consistency of the symbol, two serpents, one central column, ascent toward the crown, suggests they were all mapping the same territory. The Kemetic initiates called the risen serpent force different names in different contexts. Sometimes it appeared as a goddess, sometimes as the fire of transformation, sometimes as the power that allowed the personality soul to unite the vital force and become the illuminated spirit. The initiation temples like those at Luxor and Karnak were designed as architectural representations of the human body. The initiate walking through the temple was walking through a scaled-up model of their own subtle anatomy, and the rites performed at each station corresponded to activations at specific points along the spine. Understanding this removes the sense that the serpent force belongs exclusively to any single tradition. It is human, it exists because you have a human nervous system, a spine, and the particular arrangement of energy that comes with embodiment. The traditions that mapped it precisely happen to have preserved their maps through unbroken lineages. But what they mapped belongs to the body you are wearing right now, regardless of your cultural background or spiritual orientation. The central channel requires special attention because it represents something different from the other two. The left and right channels are the mechanism of experience. They create the polarity that makes subject and object, self and world, possible. The central channel is what exists when polarity resolves. Normally, presence bounces between the two sides. You are either receiving or projecting, taking in or putting out, contemplating or acting. The movement between these poles is experience itself, and this movement occurs through the side channels. Energy flows predominantly through the left when you're in receptive mode, and predominantly through the right when you're in active mode. Back and forth throughout the day, throughout your life, creating the texture of time passing and events occurring. The central channel opens when the oscillation stops. This happens when the two forces come into such complete balance that each pull matches the other exactly. In that moment of equilibrium, presence that was distributed between poles returns to center, and the central channel, normally constricted by the knots created where left and right cross, suddenly has no tension on it. The knots loosen, space opens, and what was dormant at the base can begin to move. This is why breath balancing practices appear in every tradition that works with these energies. By equalizing airflow through both nostrils, you create the conditions for the two currents to equalize. When they equalize, the central channel opens naturally through the absence of the forces that were keeping it closed. Awakening in this context means letting go. The power rises when the obstruction to its rising dissolves. The Isha lineage's Shambhavi Mahamudra practice works with this principle. Part of the practice involves breath work that balances the two channels. Part involves focusing presence at the point between the eyebrows, where the two channels converge and meet the central channel. The combination creates both balance below and a drawing point above. Energy naturally moves toward where attention rests. When attention rests at the meeting point of the channels while the channels are in balance, conditions become optimal for the dormant force to stir. The power at the base of your spine is described as sleeping, but this description requires nuance. It remains conscious, though veiled. Consciousness cannot become unconscious. It can only forget what it is. The sleeping occurs in the sense that full power is contracted into potential rather than expressed in actuality, like a seed containing a tree without yet being a tree, like a compressed file holding vast information in minimal space. When the conditions become right, the power stirs. This stirring is sometimes dramatic and sometimes so subtle you would miss it unless you knew what to look for. The subtle version feels like a deepening of presence, a sensation of something gathering at the base of the spine, warmth there that is produced by something other than physical exertion, a feeling of aliveness in the pelvic region that carries a quality of potential about to actualize. The more dramatic version involves heat, energy currents that feel like they're moving physically along the spine, involuntary movements, and altered states that can range from blissful to terrifying depending on the readiness of the system receiving them. Both subtle and dramatic versions are valid awakenings. The subtle version is preferable because it indicates a gradual, integrated process rather than a sudden breakthrough that the system may be unprepared to handle. The Tamil Siddhars, the 18 perfected ones of the South Indian tradition, achieved what their lineage calls the deathless state through work with this force. They understood the power as what creates, maintains, and dissolves the body. By awakening it and directing its ascent through the central channel, they gained access to the very mechanism of bodily existence. Legends attribute to them physical immortality, alchemical accomplishments, and the ability to take different forms at will. Whether literally true or metaphorically instructive, these accounts point to the scope of what this force can accomplish when fully awakened and properly directed. The Siddhars pursued liberation as the ultimate goal. Yet the powers that arose along the way demonstrated that the force being worked with was tangible, real, consequential, the creative energy that manifests and sustains physical reality. When that energy comes under conscious direction, what was previously fixed becomes malleable. What seemed like immutable laws of nature show themselves as habits that can be changed by one who has access to the level where habits are formed. Now we turn to direct verification. Everything described so far would be merely interesting philosophy if you could check it against your own experience. The channels exist in your body right now. You can feel their presence without believing anything. Sit in a way that allows your spine to be relatively straight, without rigidity. Close your eyes and bring your attention to your breath without changing it. Notice which nostril currently carries more airflow. Place your attention there without analysis. Now imagine and then feel a current of subtle energy that begins at the nostril carrying more air and descends on that side of your body. Follow this current downward. Past the throat. Past the heart. Past the navel. Down to the base of the spine. You may notice a quality associated with this side. If the left nostril is dominant, you may sense coolness, receptivity, spaciousness. If the right nostril is dominant, you may sense warmth, alertness, readiness for action. Now bring attention to the other nostril. the one carrying less air. Without forcing the breath to change, notice this side. Sense the current on this side descending similarly from the nostril toward the base of the spine. Hold presence of both sides simultaneously, left and right, moon and sun, receptive and active. You may feel a subtle tension between them. Each pulling in a slightly different direction. Now place your attention at the point between your eyebrows. This is where the two channels converge before terminating at the nostrils. Rest attention here while maintaining peripheral sensing of both side currents. Notice what happens to the breath when you hold attention at this convergence point. Often the breath becomes subtle, almost imperceptible. The two sides may begin to balance. The dominant nostril becoming less dominant, the restricted one opening slightly. If the breath equalizes even briefly, you may sense something open in the center. A subtle column of space running between the base of the spine and the crown of the head. This is the central channel becoming perceptible because the side channels have temporarily stopped constricting it. Whatever you experienced or failed to experience, let the practice complete. Let the breath return to normal and open your eyes. That brief exercise demonstrated several principles. First, you can detect channel dominance through the nostrils. Second, attention drawn to the convergence point tends to balance the channels. Third, when balance occurs, something becomes perceptible at the center that was previously closed. These are phenomena you can observe directly. If this channel balance experience was new to you, or if you've worked with these energies before and this added a new dimension, mention it in the comments. Understanding the two channels allows you to work with your own states more intelligently. If you need to rest and recover but feel wired and activated, you can intentionally engage the lunar channel. If you need to act and produce but feel lethargic and diffuse, you can intentionally engage the solar channel. The traditions developed specific techniques for each. To activate the lunar channel, lie on your right side. This compresses the right nostril slightly and opens the left. Within minutes, airflow shifts to favor the left nostril, and the corresponding current becomes more dominant. You can also breathe exclusively through the left nostril by gently closing the right with your finger. 5 to 10 minutes of this intentional breathing shifts the entire system toward the lunar quality, cooling, calming, drawing energy inward. To activate the solar channel, lie on your left side or breathe exclusively through the right nostril. This produces heating, activating effects, digestion strengthens, physical energy increases, mental focus sharpens. The system prepares for activity rather than rest. These are practical applications of subtle anatomy that anyone can use immediately. The knowledge was considered advanced only because the culture that preserved it restricted access. The techniques themselves are straightforward once you understand what you're working with. The Isha tradition incorporates both channel-specific work and practices designed to transcend the channels entirely. The preparatory practices that lead toward Shambhavi Mahamudra include breath work that cleanses and balances both channels. This creates the foundation. The Shambhavi practice itself focuses presence at the point between the eyebrows, while maintaining a particular relationship with the breath. This draws energy toward the center and creates conditions for the central channel to open. With sustained practice over months and years, what opens temporarily during practice begins to stabilize as a more permanent condition. The practitioner operates increasingly from center, rather than oscillating between poles. Make sense? The Kashmir Shaivism perspective adds another layer to this understanding. In that tradition, the power at the base of the spine is consciousness itself. The entire framework of sleeping power and rising awakening is a play that consciousness performs with itself. The descent happens so that the experience of ascending can occur. The forgetting happens so that the joy of remembering becomes possible. The sleep happens so that waking up can be experienced. From this view, you are consciousness itself, temporarily playing at being someone looking at consciousness from outside. The one seeking awakening and the one to be awakened are the same. The entire drama, seeker, path, destination, occurs within the very knowing that is playing all the roles. This recognition coexists with the practical work. The channels still need balancing, the knots still need loosening, the vessel still needs preparation. But the recognition shifts the orientation from acquisition to uncovering. You are removing what obscures what was always present. The power was always awake, playing sleep for the pleasure of the waking moment. You are that. You have always been that. Abhinavagupta, the great synthesizer of Kashmir Shaivism in the 10th century, wrote extensively about this paradox. The very seeking of liberation confirms the presence of the one who is already free. Only consciousness can seek consciousness. Only the power can look for the power. The seeking is the sought wearing a costume and preparing to recognize itself afresh in the mirror. When this recognition lands, the entire project of spiritual attainment shifts. You stop striving to get somewhere and start noticing that where you wanted to arrive is where you already stand. The practices continue, but they become play rather than labor. The power rising through the central channel is consciousness enjoying its own unfolding. What it unfolds into is what it always was, temporarily veiled for the delight of unveiling. The danger in this teaching is spiritual bypassing, using the recognition that you are already free as an excuse to avoid the practical work that makes that freedom embodied rather than merely conceptual. Yes, you are consciousness. Yes, the power is already awake, and also your channels may be imbalanced, your knots may be tight, and your system may be unprepared to carry what you are. Both truths coexist. Ultimate nature and relative condition dance together. Holding both creates the conditions for genuine transformation that recognizes what you are while becoming capable of living from that recognition. The preparation I mentioned earlier is woven into the recognition itself. It is how recognition becomes integrated. You can have a flash of seeing that you are boundless presence, but if the nervous system cannot hold that seeing, it collapses back into contracted identity almost immediately. The channels need to be prepared to carry the charge that comes with recognition. The knots need to be loosened so the energy has somewhere to go. The mind needs to be purified of the conflicting patterns that would fragment the clarity that arises. This is why legitimate traditions emphasize foundation before breakthrough. It is practical understanding of how the system works. A breakthrough without foundation creates crisis rather than liberation. The power awakening in an unprepared system is fire trapped in a structure that cannot contain it. The fire will burn what cannot hold it. The preparation ensures that what burns is only the illusion, leaving the nervous system, the mind, and the life of the practitioner intact and transformed. The two serpents winding around the central staff represent this entire teaching in visual form. The serpent on the left carries the lunar force, cool, receptive, associated with the feminine principle in traditions that use gendered language. The serpent on the right carries the solar force, warm, projective, associated with the masculine principle. Each is complete in its own way. Each requires the other for the fullness of human experience. Their interweaving creates the dance from which experience emerges. The staff at the center is what remains when the dance resolves. The central channel opens when the two forces come into such perfect balance that they stop pulling in opposite directions. In that resolution, the power that was distributed between the two polarities consolidates at the center and begins its ascent. Each junction it passes through, each knot that loosens as it rises, unlocks a new dimension of consciousness. What was potential becomes actual. What was asleep wakes up. What was you looking for the power becomes the power recognizing that it was always both seeker and sought. The serpent at the pharaoh's brow and the serpent at the yogi's crown point to the same destination. When the power completes its ascent through the central channel, it reaches the topmost center and meets what tradition calls the masculine principle, the witness that was watching the entire journey, the knowing that was present before the descent began and remained unchanged throughout all the drama of seeking and finding. The union of these two at the crown is described in ecstatic terms across traditions. Bliss beyond anything the senses can produce, the completion that ends all sense of lacking, the marriage of form and formlessness, energy and knowing, movement and stillness. And yet even this description is framework. What occurs cannot be contained in imagery of serpents and channels and crowns. What occurs is consciousness recognizing that it was always unified. Power and witness, energy and knowing, seeker and sought were always one, playing at being two for the pleasure of reunion. The journey was real and also always already complete. The seeking was authentic and also always fulfilled. Paradox dissolves in the knowing that cannot be spoken, only lived. A longer practice sequence now. This integrates what we have discussed into a 15 to 20-minute session you can do alone, requiring nothing but your body and attention. Find a seated position where your spine is straight but relaxed. You can sit on the floor or in a chair. What matters is the spine's alignment, the sense of verticality. Close your eyes and let the body settle for a few breaths. Begin by placing attention at the base of the spine. This is where the power rests. You are creating no image. Hold your attention at this point, as if you were resting your hand on a surface. Notice whatever sensations are present there. Warmth, pressure, pulsing, tingling, or perhaps nothing distinct. Whatever is present, allow it. Whatever is absent, allow that too. Now let your attention travel upward along the spine. Move slowly. Feel each segment of the vertebral column as you ascend. Lower back, middle back, upper back, neck, base of the skull. Let your attention come to rest at the crown of the head. Now return your attention to the base of the spine. And this time notice the left side of the body. Feel or imagine a subtle channel running from the base of the spine upward along the left side. Crossing the center line at several points and ending at the left nostril. Without forcing anything, notice any quality associated with this left side. Coolness, receptivity, the quality of taking in. Now shift attention to the right side. Feel or imagine a subtle channel running from the base of the spine upward along the right side. Crossing the center line at several points. And ending at the right nostril. Notice any quality associated with this right side. Warmth, the quality of projecting outward. Readiness for action. Now hold both sides in sensing simultaneously. Left and right, moon and sun, Notice them as a pair, intertwined around a central axis. Bring your attention to the point between the eyebrows. This is where the two channels converge before terminating at the nostrils. Rest attention here, while holding peripheral sensing of the two side channels below. You may notice the breath becoming subtle. The two sides may begin to balance. Presence equally distributed between them. Allow this balancing without forcing it. If balance occurs, turn attention to the center of the body. The central channel runs from the base of the spine to the crown. With the side channels balanced, this center may become perceptible. A subtle openness running through the core of your body. Rest attention at the base of this central channel. This is where the dormant power lies. Allow nothing to rise, be present, attentive. Notice the quality of knowing itself that is attending to this point. The one who is looking. The presence that is aware of the base of the spine. That presence is the power you seek. The very knowing looking for it is the power. Already awake. Playing at seeking itself. Allow this recognition to rest without needing to do anything with it. power seeking the power. Consciousness looking for consciousness already complete. Already whole. Remembering what it temporarily forgot. Rest here for as long as feels natural. When you are ready, let the breath deepen. Let sensing expand to include the room around you. And open your eyes. That practice combines channel work with recognition pointing. The first portion addresses the relative level. The channels exist, they can be felt, they can be balanced. The final portion addresses the ultimate level. What is doing the feeling is what is being felt, and the separation between seeker and sought dissolves in the noticing. Both levels matter. The relative work prepares the vessel. The recognition ensures that the vessel's preparation serves liberation rather than becoming another project for the ego to accomplish. You balance the channels and recognize that you are what witnesses the balance. You awaken the power and recognize that you are the power awakening. Together, they create completion. The power at the base of your spine was always in plain sight. It functioned as the very aliveness you feel right now, the very knowing listening to these words, the very existence that you cannot doubt, because doubting it would require it. The concealment was a game, and the game required forgetting in order for seeking to occur, and seeking had to occur in order for the joy of finding to be possible. The two channels are its agents, creating the polarity through which experience arises. Without left and right, without receptive and active, without the endless oscillation between poles, there would be no texture to existence. The play of the serpents is the play of life itself, and you are both the one watching the play and the play itself watching itself through what appears to be your eyes. The central channel is what opens when you stop oscillating and rest at center. It was always there, always open at the subtlest level, always available to the one who stopped long enough to notice. The techniques that balance the side channels and open the center are useful, effective, worth practicing. And they work because they create conditions for recognition, because they remove what obscures what was always present. The rising is consciousness unfolding back to itself after the adventure of pretending to be separate, limited, bound. What unfolds is what was always folded. What awakens is what was always awake, playing sleep for the pleasure of the waking moment. You are that. You have always been that. The serpents, the channels, the crown, the base, the whole architecture of ascent, all of it is consciousness playing its structure within its own infinite space. If this transmission landed, if something recognized itself in these words beyond what the mind can process, take a moment to acknowledge that. Drop a comment about what stirred, share this with someone ready to hear it. Subscribe if you have yet to do so. We return to these depths repeatedly. From angles you cannot predict, circling the unspeakable from directions that keep surprising even us. The power is the very knowing that wants to find it, looking through what you call your eyes, breathing through what you call your lungs, listening through what you call your ears. It was always visible, playing at concealment, and now, in this moment, it begins to play seeking that ends in finding what was already found. That is the truth, the two serpents in code. That is what the traditions preserved through millennia of transmission. That is what your spine carries whether you practice or pass through life in complete ignorance of these teachings. The power is there, the channels function, the architecture awaits. What you do with this information is your choice, but the information itself is anatomy. It is how you are built. And when you work with how you are built, what was sleeping wakes, what was potential becomes actual, and what you thought you were dissolves into what you are. Two serpents, one spine, the power rising. This is the technology embedded in your body waiting for you to use it. Use it.